where Jesus says in Matthew 11, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And I actually don't know anyone who is living like that. And I looked around and specifically at most of the women I knew, and I said, I don't know a single woman who would say she knows what that means. And I didn't know at the time a single woman who would say that she didn't feel tired in some capacity. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that. Like, what is the now and not yet promise here for us about fatigue? I wanted to understand what that meant.
Well, what's up, crew? It's Adam. You're listening to The Conversation. Today is episode 288, and I have a friend of mine on The Conversation who recently went through the hardest year of her life. Maybe you've gone through the hardest year of your life already. Maybe that hardest year of your life is yet to come. But my guest, she just shares about what she learned about God and herself through that hardest year. Friends, today, wherever you are, just know I'm so honored, thrilled, thankful that you are tuning in. I hope this episode will encourage you. If it does, please take a second to share it with a friend. Before we go any further, though, and more than that, I want to give a huge shout out to our partners. Each week, these partners help make these conversations possible. They're also businesses and organizations that I personally know and trust very, very well, and that's why I want you to know about them as well. Our first partner today is the International Justice Mission. IJM is an amazing global nonprofit working to end human trafficking and slavery around the world. They focus especially on the most vulnerable people experiencing poverty. For more than 20 years, IJM has worked with governments and officials to help them create a world where people aren't trafficked or abused in the first place. They're an amazing organization. I'm going to be going to Kenya very, very soon with IJM to see the work they do firsthand myself. I cannot wait for that trip. But to learn more about IJM, visit IJM.org. Again, that's IJM.org. Our second partner today is Vern Eide Mitsubishi. Vern Eide Motor Cars is an amazing, growing, faith-based company that strives to deliver dreams and transform lives. And Vern Eide's goal is excellence in everything that they do. And friends, they deliver that. I've purchased my last 3 vehicles from Vern Eide. I recommend them to everyone. Honestly, if I hear of anybody looking for a car, truck, tractor, boat, whatever, I'm like, don't go anywhere else. Just go right to Vern Eide. No matter what kind of vehicle you're looking for, maybe it's an Outlander like I drive, or an Acura, a Ford, Chevy, GMC, Honda. Like, you name the make of vehicle, they most likely have it. And no matter where you live, they will ship it to you. Go visit verneide.com. Again, that's verneide.com. Well, today, our guest, I had the honor of connecting with Jess Connolly. Jess is an author. She is a speaker. She is a podcaster. She is a pastor. I'm a huge fan of her husband, Nick, a guy that I've had in the past, and I was so grateful just to connect with Nick and Jess in person just a few months back. But as I mentioned, Jess opens up and she shares about the hardest year of her life. We also talk about the importance of rest, and Jess shares some simple tips on how to find rest, even in the midst of the busiest life. You know, life is crazy and busy, and Jess is someone who's making a difference. She's causing a ripple effect for good, and yet she has found some secrets to finding rest. You can listen to the full episode on YouTube. My YouTube is Adam A. Weber, and on that full version of the episode, Jess will talk about how to pursue something, how to pursue the goal that God places on your heart, even when you feel like you're not getting any traction with it. Some of us are maybe pursuing a God-given dream, and yet we're not getting any traction. Well, Jess shares specifically about that. On that note, though, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation. So, Jess, we typically always hear the highlight reels. Is there a current unpretty part of your life? It can be stress, it can be jadedness, it can be grief, big or small. I will let you go wherever you want to go. A current unpretty part.
I just want to say, number one, I appreciate this question so much. Number two, I appreciate it from you because I feel like your entire affect is so encouraging that
Ah,
I want to tell encouraging people the hard stuff, you know, like if you feel like a soft place to land. Um, yeah, we just referenced, I saw you a couple months ago. We met for the first time in person. I told you you are such an encouragement to my husband and I, and we often both just mention what a blessing you are. And I think we may have word vomited our trauma on you. I can't quite remember. Um, but I do remember that was a particularly hard week of our fall. We've truly just we've just lived through the worst 15 months of our life. And we've really moved from one trauma to the next, starting with my husband's mental health crisis and also kind of health crisis, moving into a health crisis for my stepdad, who's like a dad to me, who he ended up
yeah.
passing away really suddenly and unexpectedly. I have a really close extended family. Um, and from there, we moved into a really intense struggle with one of our kids that has just been devastating, that we obviously haven't shared online. It's just been too much. And um, that kiddo story is theirs to share, but it's just been the most intense thing we've ever walked through, the most intense grief and pain
Ugh.
that we've ever walked through. And on top of that, just to make it fun, Adam, we're renovating a house.
Oh my
And we've
gosh.
been renovating this house that we purchased in 2023. And it's now 2025, just for anyone doing the math. And so we've been paying two mortgages since July 2023. We have been renovating this house there were days where it felt like a God dream and a miracle, and this is so crazy, and God made it possible to buy this house, and felt like we were supposed to buy it, and blah, blah, blah. And there's days it feels like an absolute nightmare. And the last week has been a nightmare. And we are now currently selling our current house. The plan was always to keep our current house and rent it out and be a blessing in that way. Now we're like, no, we got to abandon ship. We got to get rid of this house. We can't have two houses anymore. So we're currently selling our current house. And I have four kids and a dog. And we lead a church and I run a business. And now we're showing our house. So, for example, today was at the doctor with my daughter, got a little request showing at 4 p.m. today. I'm like, yes, I'll go home and clean the whole house. That's what we'll do. So the renovation should not be the thing that's going to take me out, but it might be. And just pray. Just pray for me. Listen, also, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking, but you'll appreciate this. I spoke at an event this past weekend at a church, and it was the most beautiful event. I love this church so much. I love going there. I love their people. I love their entire staff. I just love them so much. And I was speaking at their event, and they were at the end of a 21-day fast, and they had brought me in to help
Oh,
them end the fast. And so you just got a room full of 1,000+ women hungry for God. Um, and I stood on the stage and I said, anytime I'm in a room like this where so many women are hungry for God, you guys have been fasting for 21 days. You've been going after His presence, His power, all the things. I said, I feel like it would be a missed opportunity if I did not ask you to pray for my house to sell. And they just were like, really? I was like, yeah, all of you right now. If you could just pray
please,
for my
please,
house
please,
to
right now.
sell. And then that's what I did when I was with 1,000 fasting women this weekend. So yeah, that's the bulk of my life. It's mostly unpretty right now.
Well, Jess, seriously, the just your candidness, and even in this, but even on your socials, it's been refreshing to hear someone not try to shine it up at all. I was going to ask this later. What have you, in the last 15 months, is there been two or three things specifically that God has taught you? It doesn't have to even be spiritual. Has there been two or three
Yeah.
things that you've just like, this is what I've learned? This is my takeaway
Mm.
from this.
Yeah. I'll tell you the first thing I've learned is about me. And um, I've learned that my default stance, if I'm really honest, my default stance is to crouch. When I experience hardship and pain, I don't think I knew this about myself. I think I thought I was like a fighter. I thought it was I had like a little Mulan in me, you know. And my default stance in the midst of pain actually is very much to hide and say like, no
Oof.
more. I can't do it. I I've been able to viscerally acknowledge a couple of times that I had this visceral desire for someone to come and fix it. I just want someone to. I mean, I'm like, can Beth Moore come? Who
Yeah.
who will show up to our house and just fix it? You know. Um, and as you know, when you're the pastor, when you're the parent, when you're the leader of the business, um, we have incredible support. We have amazing people in our lives, and also, um, Jesus is rescuer and he is the king, and often there's nobody over you to say like, we've got this, we'll take care of it. So that's my number one thing I've probably learned just about me. And in that I think there's an invitation to ask, is that who I believe God's made me to be? Is that who I want to keep being?
Yeah.
I would say in light of that, moving from that, I think noticing about myself that my default state in the midst of pain is kind of to crouch and say like, no more, please don't hurt me. Um, is that I never realized just how intensely I really vacillate towards shame. And I should have maybe known that, like having written a book about body shame and having done a lot of identity work with myself and others in the past, I maybe should have known like, wow, this is a really hot button place for you to struggle with shame. But I think everything that happened to us, I still really felt like it was my fault all the time.
Whoa.
And yeah, just everything. And I've said this before, like I'm the kind of person that in the middle of the pandemic, I was convinced the pandemic was my fault. Like I was like, I don't know how, but I think I started this. I really in intense moments of stress, I want to take responsibility. And so I think, wrestling through this trial with one of our kids, the biggest thing the Lord has taught me is it's not that there's no responsibility for me. It's not that there's nothing for me to pay attention to, like what I could have done better or how I can grow as a parent from this. But just recently, I've felt an invitation from the Lord to say, like, do you want to keep living into this narrative that you're to blame and all of this is your fault? Or would you maybe like to believe that I've placed you in this kid's life on purpose?
Oof.
And I think I'm starting to believe, okay, maybe I did not cause this trial. Maybe I was born for this. Maybe maybe God actually knows what he's doing and he placed this family together for this season. Um, and that feels wild to me, you know? It just feels like a whole new level of trusting the Lord.
Whoa. I don't know if this is okay to ask because like I didn't so something inside of me, if there I'm constantly, I don't know if this connects or not. We can edit this out if it doesn't. I always feel like I'm maybe doing something wrong. Like
Yeah.
I feel guilty a lot. Like, did I accidentally hurt that person? Is could this be perceived as wrong? So I find myself really feeling that, and I'll literally have to tell my wife almost like I'm feeling really guilty, like I'm doing something immoral here. Is this immoral? And she's like, no. Like why would you even think that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just feel like I've done something wrong that I don't even know I've done wrong, but maybe I have or something.
Yeah.
I think that's probably totally different, isn't it? Or no? I'm like, I did not
No.
expect to share this, but listening to you, I'm like, I feel like
Yeah.
I maybe have some of that.
Yeah.
Does that resonate at all? And can you pinpoint why that comes from in you? And I'm kind of asking to self-diagnose myself, but I'll stop talking.
Listen, I'm loving this conversation. And to be honest, it if we're going to talk about rest at all, this is some of the work I had started to do when I wrote Tired of Being Tired. And so I think that's partially
Whoa.
why it was so shocking for me, is that I was like, oh no, I've I've like worked this out, and I feel like to a certain degree I had worked it out in ministry. I had really
Yeah.
started to understand what was mine to hold and what wasn't mine to hold. It's so much messier with parenting because you're like, yeah, but you are my kid. So this is a lot.
Yeah.
This is interesting. I don't know how much work you've done in therapy before, but what my therapist would call this, and I've done a good amount of work in therapy, in the last year, including, heading to like long term. I went to like a week long intensive program, but I mean, my therapist would say this is just classic codependency. Um, just classic codependency. And I would say, my therapist would say, I've got some codependent stuff with God, that I'm codependent with God, that I believe he
Whoa.
needs me in a way that he has never communicated that he needs me.
Whoa. How about that? Okay. Um,
Yeah.
well,
No
and
big.
I've done quite a bit. I've, I've done quite a bit of therapy, but this is maybe something, that I need to definitely bring up the next time I'm there because, honestly, just listening to you share that, I'm like, yeah, I think in some, maybe it might look totally different for me, but I
Yeah.
do. Like I really will convince myself that I've done something wrong, and then I'll verbalize it to a friend or to my wife or best friend, and they'll be like, "No, that's you didn't do anything wrong." And I'm like, "But
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
I've done that." And um,
Yeah.
Jess, okay, this past year, you again, I just want to thank you for sharing that. Um, your book, your latest book, "Tired of Being Tired." And your heart for why you wrote it, how, and I'll just start there. Why for you specifically was this a needed book, and where did it come from
Yeah.
inside of you?
Yeah. It came for me in the form of pain, which is so fun. But I hit my largest ministry wall in 2020, around starting, I would say in 2020, but a full mental, spiritual, physical breakdown in 2022. Um, I started I started struggling with insomnia. That was kind of the first step. And I thought that, maybe it was just God waking me up to pray. Here's some of that codependency with God. I was like, God, I'm just going to wake up and pray. That's the godly response. But one night of insomnia led to 3 nights in a row of insomnia, led to an entire week of not being able to sleep. And my insomnia kind of bled into a pretty intense panic disorder. So I started experiencing multiple panic attacks a day, and I'd had one or two in the past, but this was a whole nother level. This was a whole nother
Yep.
situation. And I'll say what's interesting is that at this time in my life, I had pretty standard rhythms of rest for, I would say, a pastor, maybe even more stringent or more well developed rhythms of
Whoa.
rest than maybe other people would say. I took a Sabbath. I tried not to, use my phone after a certain time of night. I was a pretty boundaried person at this point in ministry. So I started going to God's word and saying, God, I have believed you about all these other things. I've believed you about, the goodness of my body, the theology of my body. I've believed you about my identity. I've believed you about calling. I've said yes to you in all these other ways that have kind of put my feet in the water. This one piece, I do not believe you about. And where Jesus says in Matthew 11, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And I actually don't know anyone who is living like that. And I looked around and specifically at most of the women I knew, and I said, I don't know a single woman who would say she knows what that means. And
Oh.
I didn't know at the time a single woman who would say that she didn't feel tired in some capacity. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that. Like, what is the now and not yet promise here for us about fatigue? I wanted to understand what that meant. And so for me, Tired of Being Tired was my most experimental book. I was um, supposed to write a book during this time, and my publisher called and they said, "Hey, why don't you come on out and have a meeting? We'll work on your next book idea." And I was like, "You guys, you don't want me. I am not the one. Like, I am a whole mess. I'm having so many issues right now. I'm physically struggling. I'm mentally struggling. I can't make it through a conversation without crying. Like, I'm having just like an emotional breakdown." And they said, "Why don't you come out anyways? We'll just spend some time with you." And so on the way out there, I did some research and I wrote that sentence down. Every woman I know is tired. And I sat in a room with them and, I just said like, "Hey, this is my biggest pain point right now. I think I don't know a woman who's not struggling with it in some capacity." And so, and I said that to them about Matthew 11. I said, "Jesus says this. I based my entire life on what Jesus says. I don't believe him about this thing. So I must not understand it, or I must not be receiving it correctly, or I must not be following him in some way that is keeping me from experiencing this rest." And they said, "Hey, why don't you just chase it down? And if you find anything, you can write a book about it. And if you don't, we'll come back later and you can write about something else." And, 6 months later, I had a working hypothesis. I didn't have a book, I didn't have a paragraph. Um, but I had a working hypothesis. And essentially, my hypothesis was this: that there are different types of rest and there are different types of fatigue. And what I was finding to be true for me is that I was not experiencing rest in the places where I was most fatigued. And so I was continually feeling exhausted. And so, yeah, I would say it's interesting. Tired of Being Tired came out of that. It was kind of
Yeah.
it almost to me like felt clinical, like researching it. I had 70 women read it as I wrote it because I wanted to say, like, I'm trying this, but it can't just work for me. Can you guys try it too? Um, but it felt for me like the beginning of the conversation because, again,
Whoa.
God has continually showed me, like, okay, now what about in grief? What about in trauma? What about in pain? What does it look like now to rest in these new areas? So that was a long-winded way to say
No,
it came
that
from pain.
oh, Jess, maybe before even the insomnia, like, are you your personality? Are you a driver? Are you driven? And what do you think led you to struggling to sleep at night and all that kind of thing? Share that quick
Such a
first.
good question. That's such a good question. Yes, I am really driven. If you're into the Enneagram at all, and I know you might be, because we have a mutual friend in Mike Foster, I know you might be into the seven primal questions. I don't know. I am. I really appreciate his book
Yes.
on and this work. Um, so on the Enneagram, I'm not an Enneagram 3, and for a long time that's why I couldn't figure out, like, what's my deal? Why am I so driven? But I do identify as an Enneagram 8. And then the seven primal questions, my top question is, am I secure? So a lot of my working and pushing is about feeling safe. It's about knowing, like, I'm going to be okay and I'm going to take care of me. But I think the insomnia for me, honestly, it when I look back, why I think that kind of restlessness began to bleed into my sleep was extreme mental and spiritual fatigue. So spiritual fatigue for
Oof.
me being, I did not know where I ended and where God began. I didn't know what was his job and what was my job. Um, in every sense, I didn't know in parenting. I think I really did believe, like, my job is to disciple my kids into solid believers. And in pastoring, I thought, like, my job is to help these people, to get these people to spiritually grow. And my job as a follower of Jesus is to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Sidebar: one of my favorite things I found out writing Tired of Being Tired. Did you know? You probably did, Adam, that the phrase "hands and feet of Jesus" not in Scripture, not biblical. We're just going around telling people you got to be the hands and feet of Jesus. We're singing it. We're putting it on prints. He never says it. And so even that like small distinction, he calls us the body of Christ. He says the hand wouldn't say to the foot, but that's about church unity. So even this one idea that I'm walking on thinking I have to be the hands of Jesus, I have to be the feet of Jesus. When from my perception, I do perceive that God was like, do you think I cannot do things without you? Do you think I cannot go where you are not? Do you think I cannot speak where you do not open your mouth? I'm actually incredibly capable. So I think a lot of my insomnia was from spiritual fatigue, but I think it was also from mental fatigue. Just not honestly like appropriately closing the apps in my brain. Just not saying no to mental stimuli that I didn't know how I
Yes.
didn't know I was allowed to just shut down and say no thanks. I can't do that.
Ugh. Okay, so I am a 3 on the Enneagram. My primal question, am I successful? Oh, geez. When I hear both of those things, first off, I'm like, can I pick a different number in question? I struggle to rest. I mean, I struggle terribly to rest. And I feel like I've made some pretty drastic changes. I have a full time assistant who's been game changing. I'm saying no to more things ever, but
Yeah.
still, rest is an elusive thing for me. Um, Practical things like takeaways for someone like myself who's listening, that you would encourage, like here's 2 or 3 things to
Mm.
wrestle with, or 2 or 3 things to do, or whatever it might be that you would share, Jess.
Okay.
And you can ask or
I'd
say
ask you,
anything, by the way.
yeah, I want
I'm
to
giving
ask
you
a
full
few
permission to ask my deep
diagnostics.
dark secrets. Let's go. Let's go.
Okay.
I'm ready.
I just have 2 questions. When you find yourself the most fatigued, like to the point where I think fatigue is a little bit like thirst, right? They say that by the time you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So by
Yep.
the time you're fatigued, we're past tired at that point. By the time you'd say, "Man, I'm beat." Um, what if someone asked you, if your wife or a friend was like, "Okay, what do you feel like is making you the most tired?" What would you say?
Oof. I would say covering all the things that I have to do. And this is going
Okay.
to be really honest, trying to keep everyone happy. That's being
Yeah.
really honest.
Yeah.
That's yeah, those would be the 2 things that I would say.
Okay.
Just trying to keep the plates all spinning, and I just don't want people upset with me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's pause there. My second diagnostic question would be describe your most life-giving day. It doesn't have to be a restful day. Like describe the most deeply abundant life-giving day in as much detail as you want to.
Oof, I would probably say, I mean, morning coffee by myself at a coffee shop where no one knows who I am. Um, and then followed by maybe just reading, and being with my wife by our fireplace.
Mm-hmm.
And then my grandparents, when they were alive, they had this beautiful creek behind their house that my folks now own. And I would say going there, there's no phone reception, there's no nothing with my dog. And the 2 of us
Mm.
just, I went last fall and I fell asleep on the side of a grassy hillside for like
Wow.
an hour and a half. So that's probably what I would say, just all of
Wow.
that.
Mm. Okay. Well, if I had to quick diagnose, there is a quiz in the book. So I would say go take it. It's fun. It's also actually on my
Take
website.
it.
You can go to, I think, jessconnolly.com/quiz. It's free.
Perfect.
Um, and if I had to guess what your quiz would say, I would say spiritual fatigue. I think that making people happy, because I know you, is probably deeper rooted, not in like them wanting, not in them loving you or thinking you're great, but in probably something beautiful and that you just really want to be on people's team.
Yeah.
You really want to support them. You really want to be there for them. And if I had to like conjecture and like speak into it a little, I would say I just think most pastors are probably really struggling with spiritual fatigue. And I don't know that it's a problem we caused. I think a lot of it is because people's expectations of us are unhealthy and maybe not what God would have said that he expects from pastors. Um, so I would say there's probably like something really helpful might be having some core truths that you speak over yourself when you notice that, just something along the lines of like, I actually cannot make people happy. That is God's job. Also, he would probably say, that's not really my job. I'm not trying to make everybody happy. I think like some simple truths like that might be really helpful. But really what I believe is the most helpful tool for all people, no matter what kind of fatigue they're struggling with, is to do exactly what you just did, which is like describe what fills you up the most. And I've just found when I treat myself like a daughter of God, and I say like, okay, I am going to actually plan and strategize and be thoughtful about what makes me feel the most alive. And I'm going to plan that first. I'm actually going to prioritize that first to some degree, not because I'm putting myself first, not because I'm the most important and I want to fill my cup, but really just
Yeah.
because if I don't prioritize it, it just won't happen. I will
Yeah.
take care
It's
of
so
people. I
true.
will serve people. I will love. Yeah. So I would just say plan the most life-giving activities that make you feel like a son or a daughter of God and do those things, protect those things. And I find that in the same way that getting a good night's sleep changes us for the rest of the day, I find that planning those activities, not only in my week and not only in my year, but also in my every single day. Where am I going to receive from God? Where am I just going to take it too far? Lavishly accepting what he has for me. It changes and shifts the way I come back to him the next day, you know? Yeah. So those would be my top tips.
That's so good. Is it what is it for you? Like what two or three, like just one or two things could be are helpful for you with rest? Even like given your current, I mean, you're selling a house, blah, 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 like in the chaos of life, what would you say to yourself?
I have two: exercise an hour a day. And even this is like a tiny, small distinction that I would even use as an example for people. I would still, in the past, use exercise as a tool for mission. So actually in 2020, the beginning of my breakdown, I got two fitness certifications because I was like, well, I love to preach and I like to move my body. So I'll go into secular spaces and lead workout classes where I get to that. I did that. I got a job at a bar studio, a like ballet bar studio, as if I had time for another job. But I was like, I'm good at this. This is life giving. I'll do this. But then even after that, I would, if I was going on a run, I'd ask three girls to go with me that I was discipling. Or if I was going to go on a walk, I'd ask my son so I could really, just capitalize. And instead of just saying like, I need an hour a day to just move my body to be with God, that's it. How I want to, not inviting other people into it and making it a moment. So I need to exercise every day and I need to read fiction every day. I love the Bible. I'm going to read the Bible every day. I don't really have a choice, probably like you. I got to read the Bible every day. But when I read fiction, I'm like, I'm a daughter, you know?
Whoa. No, and like even those small little tweaks of that. Last night I almost brought my youngest son with on my walk, but I knew I had some things I wanted to process with the Lord. And so I'm like, I was like, hey buddy, I think I'm just gonna go because I could tell I was at that point. And it was just a totally different thing. Instead of kind of coming back and feeling even more drained, more depleted, I came back and was able to engage with
Yeah.
him and actually be present. That's so
So
good. Okay,
good.
so we'll have a link in the show notes to that. Last question. This is totally a tangent and maybe goes against everything we've just got done talking about. This was the question that I wanted to even ask you. Any tips or advice for the person who is wanting to do something, like a book, a podcast, or a dream, but isn't getting any traction? That again, this is kind of me asking you. Just and Jess, I just see when you do things like God just kind of has his hands all over them.
Mm.
Is there advice that you would say to that person who's, I'm trying and I just don't feel like I'm getting any traction in this thing that is a desire of my heart, a dream of my heart? What would you say to that person?
So encouraging. And I don't think these things are opposed to one another. So, I mean, I think that people who rest are people who work. I think when we love rest, we love work. So
That's
I love
good.
this question. And my top tip is always the same. It's always the exact same. Obsess over who you're serving. And again, that might sound like, wow, you just said that you don't need to try to make everybody happy. But what I would say is really know who it is you're serving. The best books are ones that people open and they feel like this is for me. The best social media posts, what
Yes.
do people put in the comments? This was for me. The best podcast episodes are where you've said like, all right, let me think about where my listener is. Let me think about where they're going to listen. At what point in the week are they going to feel the most defeated or in need of encouragement? And what do they most need to hear? Um, Similarly with businesses, this is what we know about businesses. The best businesses know their who, and it's all they're thinking about every single day. So my team and I came up with 3 questions that we ask and answer every week, where everybody on my team is required to ask and answer these 3 questions every single week.
Whoa.
So we say, how is our girl feeling? We call our girl our who. We have a top person that we're always trying to serve. So how is she feeling this week? How can I serve her this week in my role? And then the last thing we say is, if I could tell her anything right now, if I could tell her anything right now, what would I tell her? And that third question almost always becomes what we end up posting on social media, because we're not thinking about what we should say. We're thinking about what we most want to tell her.
That's so good. So figure out who you're trying to serve. One more thing that you would say to that person. So figure out exactly who you're trying to
Yeah.
serve. What is their need? How can I speak to them? I'm not getting any traction, Jess. One more thing that I should do.
I would say ask somebody in your life who will give you honest feedback. Why isn't this working? Maybe they don't even do what you do. Maybe like they're not a podcaster, maybe they're not an author, but say, hey, I love you. I trust you. I'm still going to love you after you answer this for me. Why do you think this isn't going well?
So friends, how good was that? If you know of somebody who needs to hear Jess's words, please share this. Share it on your social, send it a text message to a friend, send out an email. Jess, I'm so grateful for you. Thanks to our partners. I honestly, I cannot thank God enough for these partners, the International Justice Mission and Vern Eide Mitsubishi. Go find out more about both of these awesome organizations. Also, thanks to every single one of you who listens to the conversation. I am so grateful for you. Have an awesome rest of your day.